Alyssa Carter had always considered family dinners a sacred tradition, a moment of temporary peace amid the chaos of adult life. At 32, she had weathered a turbulent year with her graphic design business nearly going under after losing her biggest client during the pandemic. But through all of it, Grandma Judith remained her constant. Elegant, wise, and fiercely independent at 79, Judith had been the steady anchor of the Carter family ever since Grandpa Harold passed away 15 years earlier. Her sprawling estate on the outskirts of Newton Hills stood in sharp contrast to the modest suburban home Alyssa grew up in. Despite the difference in wealth, Judith never flaunted her status, and Alyssa always felt more seen and understood by her grandmother than by her own parents. Growing up, her mother Marilyn would paste on a tight-lipped smile whenever Judith entered the room, while her father Bruce would turn unusually quiet and deferential. Alyssa used to chalk it up to generational gaps, but as she got older, she noticed the undercurrent of tension. Her mother's post-dinner mutterings of "your grandmother always thinks she's better than us," or "we're just the middle-class servants in her royal court," became a routine soundtrack to family gatherings. And yet, Judith was the one who encouraged Alyssa to pursue design instead of business, bought her a digital drawing tablet in high school, and paid for her photography trip to Spain at 17. Her parents, meanwhile, had insisted on a more practical career path, citing bills and market trends. Alyssa's older brother Daniel took that path, entering finance just like Bruce and keeping his distance from the family drama. Her younger sister Jenna remained neutral, always polite and distant, mimicking their mother's formal indifference. By the time Alyssa parked her dented Honda outside her parents' renovated house on a crisp October evening, she was already uneasy. The home looked different. New landscaping, sleek outdoor lighting, and a fresh paint job made the modest house look surprisingly upscale. She stepped inside and paused. A marble kitchen island, high-end appliances, plush rugs, gold accents. Had they won the lottery? Her father, usually frugal to a fault, now poured her a glass of what looked like a $100 bottle of wine. "Just a good deal," he said too quickly when she asked. Her mother beamed with pride, saying, "Sometimes you just have to treat yourself." But Alyssa knew her parents' combined incomes as a high school administrator and insurance claims officer didn't explain the sudden wealth. Her brother Daniel arrived next, muttering a greeting before heading straight for the liquor cabinet. He'd been drinking more since his divorce, but tonight he seemed particularly intent on numbing himself. Jenna appeared shortly after, glued to her phone, barely acknowledging anyone. Everyone seemed jittery, as if they were waiting for a thunderclap. At 6 on the dot, the doorbell rang. Grandma Judith had arrived. She walked in with grace, wearing a tailored navy coat and her signature pearl earrings. Her presence instantly shifted the atmosphere. Bruce rushed to greet her. Marilyn adjusted the centerpiece, and everyone plastered on their best family smiles. But Judith's eyes went straight to Alyssa. "My darling girl," she said, pulling her into a warm embrace. The scent of her perfume brought back childhood memories of baking cookies and painting in Judith's sunroom. Dinner was served with extra flair. Marilyn had prepared a feast that rivaled Thanksgiving. Prime rib, truffle potatoes, asparagus with hollandaise, and artisan bread rolls. Judith noticed immediately. "Special occasion?" she asked. "Just wanted to do something nice," Marilyn replied with a forced laugh. The conversation flowed artificially. Weather, neighborhood gossip, a charity gala Judith had declined to attend. Daniel drowned his silence in scotch. Jenna kept sneaking glances at her phone. Bruce focused on cutting his meat into mathematically perfect bites. When Judith turned to Alyssa and asked how her business was going, Marilyn jumped in. "Alyssa's doing great, no need to talk shop at dinner," but Judith ignored her. "I was asking Alyssa." Alyssa hesitated. "It's been challenging, but I'm picking up new clients, hoping to bounce back soon." "That's my girl," Judith smiled. "Perseverance is a Carter trait." Marilyn's jaw tightened. Judith's attention shifted. "Bruce, new car out front?" Bruce coughed into his wine. "Great year-end deal." "Marilyn, the kitchen looks remodeled." "Just a small update," she replied, eyes darting. "And Daniel, how's work? Partner yet?" "On track," Daniel muttered, swirling his drink. "And Jenna, how's grad school?" "Going well," Jenna chirped too brightly. "Top of my class." Judith nodded, but her sharp gaze said she knew better. As dessert was served, a perfect tiramisu, Judith set down her fork and turned to Alyssa with a question that detonated the entire illusion. "Alyssa, is the $2,000 I send you each month helping enough? I can increase it if you're still getting back on your feet." Alyssa froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the fridge, the tick of the dining room clock. "What money?" she asked, her voice cracking. Judith frowned, looking between Alyssa and Marilyn. "The monthly deposit I've been making to your emergency account." "Marilyn, you said it was for Alyssa's medical bills." Alyssa blinked. "I don't have any medical bills. I'm not sick." Bruce shifted in his chair. Judith's eyes hardened. "For 5 years, I've been transferring $2,000 monthly to an account Marilyn told me was yours. She said you'd been diagnosed with an autoimmune condition and needed help." Alyssa turned slowly to her parents. Her mother's face had drained of color. Her father stared at the tablecloth. "You lied?" Alyssa whispered. "You took money meant for me?" Judith's voice was ice. "How much have you taken, Marilyn?" Marilyn straightened her spine. "We raised her. We deserve something after everything we've done." Judith's voice cut in. "That wasn't the question." "How much?" Bruce finally spoke. "About $20,000. Alyssa gasped. That money could have saved her business, paid off her loans. Instead, her parents had used it for designer countertops and luxury wine. "And when I lost my client last year?" Alyssa asked, eyes wide. "I told you I was struggling." Judith turned to her, guilt washing over her face. "I increased it to $5,000 per month. For the past year, another $60,000 gone." Alyssa's hands trembled. She pushed away her dessert. "You watched me panic about eviction while you were spending money meant to help me?" Marilyn's voice was sharp now. "You were always Grandma's favorite. You had it easier. Why shouldn't we benefit a little too?" Alyssa stared, mouth agape. "You stole from your daughter." Bruce's shoulders slumped. It wasn't stealing. It was borrowing. Judith spoke again. "And the education fund? The trust I set up to pay for college?" Alyssa turned to her grandmother, confused. "Trust? What trust?" Judith's face darkened. "I set up funds for each of you kids. Your parents were the trustees until you turned 25. That fund should have paid all your tuition." Alyssa's heart sank. She'd worked 2 jobs in college to minimize loans. She had skipped meals, lived with 4 roommates while that fund sat untouched. "Where did it go?" she asked, barely breathing. Bruce whispered, "We tried investing. We thought we could grow it." Marilyn snapped. "It wasn't gambling, it was a business venture. One that failed," Judith corrected. "You let your daughter take out loans while money sat unused." Daniel suddenly laughed, bitter and slurred. So let me guess, my fund is gone too? The silence confirmed it. You gotta be kidding me. Daniel set his glass down hard. All those years of killing myself in banking and you were sitting on my trust fund? Jenna looked pale. What about mine? Is that why you told me I should drop out because grad school was too expensive? Bruce and Marilyn exchanged another look. Gone? Jenna whispered. You lost mine too? Bruce's voice cracked. We had a plan to replace it, eventually. With what money? Alyssa asked, rising from her seat. Another investment? Another lie? Judith stood slowly. Enough. From this moment forward, any support I provide will go directly to my grandchildren. No intermediaries. Marilyn's face twisted. You can't cut us off. We'll lose everything. Perhaps you should have considered that before you betrayed your children. Alyssa stood in stunned silence. Her parents had lied, stolen, manipulated, and they didn't even look sorry. Without a word, she turned and walked out the front door. As she started her car, she looked through the window one last time. Her mother sobbing, her father defeated, her siblings shell-shocked, and her grandmother watching it all with quiet, solemn resolve. Nothing would ever be the same again. For 3 days after the dinner, Alyssa ignored every call, every text, every voicemail that came flooding into her phone. Most were from her mother, some from her father, alternating between guilt, justification, and passive-aggressive pleas to talk things through like a family. Daniel sent a short message that read simply, "You okay?" While Jenna's silence said enough. Alyssa wanted to scream, to cry, to disappear. But mostly she just sat in her apartment in stunned paralysis, replaying every interaction she'd had with her parents over the last 5 years through a new, grotesque lens. The nights she had confessed fear over losing her apartment, and her mother had nodded sympathetically. The Christmas, she had gifted her parents a handmade photo album because she couldn't afford anything else, and they had beamed with fake gratitude while sipping $1,000 wine bought with her stolen funds. She had thought she was struggling alone. She hadn't known they were watching her drown with money in their pockets that was supposed to be her lifeline. On the 4th evening, her phone buzzed with a single voicemail from Grandma Judith. No lectures, no pressure, just a soft voice saying, "When you're ready to talk, I'm here. No rush, I love you." Alyssa sobbed the moment it ended, the dam finally breaking. She called her grandmother back that night. "Can I come over tomorrow?" "Of course, darling. I'll have Teresa bake your favorite lemon cookies." When she arrived, the scent of citrus and vanilla wrapped around her like a protective blanket. Grandma Judith waited in the sunroom, already pouring tea, her expression calm but serious. Alyssa sat, bracing herself for something she didn't yet know but suspected was worse than what had already been revealed. Judith slid a folder across the table. "I've been doing some investigating," she said, cutting through pleasantries with her signature precision. "And I'm afraid what we learned at dinner was only the surface." Alyssa opened the folder and was immediately overwhelmed by what she saw. Bank statements, trust documents, transaction logs, wire transfers, years' worth. "Your parents," Judith said gently, "have been diverting family funds for over a decade, not just yours, Daniel's and Jenna's too." Alyssa flipped through the pages, her stomach turning. A $50,000 transfer meant to help Daniel with his first home down payment. A $35,000 deposit supposedly to cover Jenna's non-existent surgery after a fake car accident. "They've been inventing crises," Judith said, voice brittle with disgust, "and using those stories to justify withdrawals from the trusts I set up for you three. I thought I was helping my grandchildren through challenges. I was funding their granite countertops and Florida vacations. Alyssa's hands trembled as she ran down the totals. Close to $400,000, Judith confirmed. Gone. Alyssa swallowed. Her mouth was dry. They've been doing this since we were teenagers? Since before you graduated high school, Judith replied. They started small, clothes for college, an apartment deposit, but it grew with each successful lie. And my student loans? Alyssa asked quietly. Paid in full 3 years ago from your trust fund. You've been sending money monthly to what you thought was a loan repayment account. That account belongs to your father. The world tilted. Alyssa had been paying $500 a month for 3 years, $18,000, to her parents, for a loan that no longer existed. Why, she whispered, why would they do that to me? Judith's face was grim. Because they have been living beyond their means for years. Credit cards, second mortgages, vanity purchases. Your mother's obsession with appearances became unsustainable. Your father, rather than confront her, enabled it. And when they ran out of their own funds, they turned to yours. Quietly, incrementally, until they were in too deep to stop. Alyssa's vision blurred. They watched me cry over unpaid bills. They knew I couldn't afford groceries, and they still took money meant for me? Yes, Judith said, and I failed to protect you from that. I trusted them to manage those trusts with integrity. I didn't expect them to weaponize family loyalty. Alyssa leaned back, the betrayal now layered so deep it scraped against the marrow of her bones. Does Daniel know all this? She asked. I've spoken to him, Judith said. He confronted your father yesterday. It didn't go well. He's furious, understandably. Jenna knows now, too. I told her this morning. She's devastated. She was still giving them the benefit of the doubt. I was, too, Alyssa whispered. That night, Daniel called her. His voice was ragged. Dad broke down, cried like I've never seen, said they thought things would turn around, that some magical inheritance would make it all okay. They gambled with our futures, Alyssa said, on fantasies. They did, Daniel agreed, and now they're drowning. Second mortgage is maxed, credit cards too, no savings, no retirement. They're not just broke, they're hollow. And yet they looked at me, Alyssa said bitterly, looked me in the eye while I was struggling and said nothing. The next day, Jenna came over. She curled up on the couch with tea and tear-streaked cheeks. 3 years ago, she said softly, Mom told me Grandma sent me something for my 25th birthday, but it got lost in the mail. She looked me in the eye and said that, so I called Grandma to thank her anyway, and she didn't know what I was talking about. What did you do? Alyssa asked. I confronted Mom. She said it would tear the family apart if I told anyone, that I was being dramatic. I believed her. Alyssa put a hand on her sister's knee. You weren't stupid. You trusted our mother. So did I. They sat together in silence for a long time. Later that week, Alyssa agreed to meet her parents. She needed to see them, face to face, not for reconciliation but for truth. When she arrived at their house, she was shocked. The luxury furniture seemed out of place now, like a costume at a wake. Her parents looked smaller, weaker. Her mother's blouse hung loosely on her frame. Her father looked 20 years older. Thank you for coming, Bruce said, rising. We weren't sure you would. I almost didn't, Alyssa replied, but I have things to say. They sat. The room felt both too big and too tight. What you did wasn't just theft, Alyssa began. It was betrayal. You watched me struggle, lie awake in fear, work 2 jobs, all while sitting on money that was supposed to help me. And you didn't say a word. Marilyn opened her mouth, but Alyssa raised a hand. I'm not done. You manipulated me. You lied repeatedly. And then, when you were caught, you had the audacity to justify it by saying you deserved it. You used love as a shield for theft. Marilyn cried quietly. Bruce nodded, shamefaced. We lost ourselves, he whispered. We never planned for it to go this far. But you let it, Alyssa said. Every month, every lie. You had choices, you made them. Now you live with them. We wanted to make amends, Marilyn said. We can't repay the money, not now, but we can rebuild the relationship. That's not your decision, Alyssa said. I decide if there's a relationship, and right now there isn't one. Maybe someday. But you need to change, truly, not just apologize. She stood, her voice firm. Don't call, don't text, don't show up. I need time and space. If you ever want to be in my life again, you'll show me through action, not words. As she walked toward the door, Marilyn sobbed. So you're abandoning us? Alyssa stopped. You abandoned me years ago. You just didn't say it out loud. And with that, she stepped into the cold autumn air, breathing freely for the first time in years. That night, she didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She sat with her pain like an old friend. She had been betrayed, but she had survived. And now she would rebuild, on her terms. No lies, no illusions, just truth. Alyssa had always believed that healing came quietly, like mist rolling over a mountain ridge, unnoticed until you found yourself standing in sunlight, but now she understood it came not as a gentle fog, but a decision. A line drawn in the sand between what had been tolerated and what would never be accepted again. The day after confronting her parents, she returned home to find herself simultaneously empty and determined. She stared at her apartment walls, still bare in places, still patched from where she hadn't had the funds to redecorate, and thought to herself, I will never be this vulnerable again. She didn't mean emotionally, she meant structurally. She would no longer allow the people closest to her to dictate her limits or shape her financial reality. That night, she sat at her computer, pulled out the folder Grandma Judith had given her, and began sorting through the damage line by line, dollar by dollar. What she found only deepened her fury and sharpened her resolve. The trust funds set up by Judith had been generous, structured specifically to ensure that each grandchild would have their college tuition paid in full, plus a modest buffer for graduate studies or career development. And yet, Alyssa had taken out loans, worked part-time through school, and gone without so much because Marilyn and Bruce had withheld what was hers. Judith had signed over trustee responsibilities when Alyssa turned 18, trusting them to act with honor. They had used that trust as a blank check. Alyssa composed a formal letter that night, a detailed account of the misappropriated funds citing the statements, the totals, the fake student loan account. Everything she sent it to a financial attorney Judith had recommended, someone experienced in family fund disputes, though Alyssa wasn't looking to sue. Not yet, she just wanted the record preserved officially. 1 week after the confrontation, her father sent a letter, not an email, not a voicemail, but an actual envelope with careful handwriting, and inside Bruce's words were not defensive, not manipulative, but defeated. He acknowledged the damage, not just financially, but relationally. He admitted to knowing it was wrong but lacking the courage to stop it. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't plead for connection. He just said he understood if she never spoke to them again, it was the first thing in weeks that didn't make her recoil. 2 days later, Judith called inviting Alyssa to brunch. Their weekly ritual had become sacred not just for the food or the sunlight that poured through the large windows in the sunroom, but because it was one of the few spaces where Alyssa could exist without performance or defense. That morning, Judith looked different, not older, but sharper, as if she too had shed something heavy from her shoulders. "I've made changes," she said, the moment tea was poured. "New trusts have been created, all funds from the old accounts have been transferred. Each of you now has direct control, no intermediaries, no secrets. I should have done this years ago, but I wanted to believe Marilyn and Bruce were better than this." "You weren't wrong to hope," Alyssa said gently, "but I won't let it happen again." Judith smiled tightly. "That's what I admire most about you. You learn then, you act." Alyssa didn't speak of the letter from her father. Instead, she asked about Daniel and Jenna. Daniel was doing better than expected, free from the toxic expectations of finance. He had begun building a small business consulting firm out of Judith's converted carriage house, a space Judith had offered rent-free for 1 year. He looked healthier, sounded lighter, like someone waking up from a decade-long sleep. Jenna, on the other hand, was still struggling. Her sense of betrayal ran deep. Her dreams of academic independence had been repeatedly undermined by Marilyn, who'd insisted her graduate program was too expensive, all while secretly diverting Jenna's trust into luxury expenses. Jenna had resumed classes with renewed resolve. But Alyssa knew the damage wasn't only financial, it was psychological. The loss of trust was hardest for the youngest, who had always been the family's peacekeeper. That week, Daniel invited Alyssa and Jenna over for dinner. He made spaghetti badly, but with effort. The three of them sat in the small space that smelled of garlic and fresh paint, and talked more honestly than they had in years. They pieced together memories, small inconsistencies, parental pressure, guilt, based manipulation, things that now made sense only in hindsight. Alyssa confessed about the fake student loan account Jenna shared, how Marilyn had told her the only reason she got into grad school was because of her last name and Judith's connections. Daniel admitted he had long suspected Dad had borrowed from the trust when his mortgage application was mysteriously denied despite perfect credit. "We spent so long trying to make them proud," Daniel said, draining his wine glass. "What a waste of effort. They never saw us as people, just props in their performance." The words rang too true. For all of them days turned into weeks. The studio that Alyssa had once dreamed of opened in a co-working space downtown, paid for by the restitution. Judith insisted on transferring to her not as a gift, but as a return of what was already hers. Alyssa used part of it to clear out the last of her credit card debt, upgrade her equipment, and for the first time ever hire a part-time assistant. She didn't live lavishly, she lived freely, and the difference was everything then. One afternoon, a text from Jenna landed on her phone. "They're losing the house." Alyssa blinked. "What do you mean, behind on the mortgage?" Jenna replied. 3 months, default notice filed. They're trying to sell before it's foreclosed." Alyssa sat with that information and felt something unexpected. Not pity, but clarity. They had built that life with stolen bricks. A house propped up by deception and stolen inheritance. It was only fitting that it would crumble. She didn't go to help, didn't offer advice. She simply noted the fact and returned to her sketch pad 2 days later. Another letter arrived, this time from Marilyn, on ivory stationery in looping cursive. It began with, I know we've hurt you, and quickly spiraled into a 3-page manifesto about pressure, societal expectations, and the silent burden of being married to perfection. Alyssa read it once, then again, slower this time, searching for something, anything that resembled accountability. It wasn't there. The letter was a justification, a confession disguised as apology. It detailed everything they had done but accepted responsibility for none of it. It was still about them. Their fear, their shame, their image. Alyssa folded the letter and slid it into the bottom drawer of her desk. Unread, since then, not out of spite, but because it held no power, she didn't respond. A week later, she met Judith again over brunch. Judith brought scones instead of cookies this time, as if marking the new season. They sat quietly for a moment before Judith spoke. She wrote, "You didn't she?" I nodded, said everything and nothing. I expected. Judith sighed. Marilyn has always believed the world owed her something. She mistook love for currency and motherhood for sacrifice. Bruce just followed quietly, hoping the noise would go away. What happens now? I asked you. Live your life, Judith said. You keep building your business. You invest in people who invest in you, and when, or if, they show up ready to truly change, not for optics, but from the marrow of their bones, then you decide if there's still room at your table. Alyssa breathed deeply. Her tea was still warm. The sunlight slanted through the windows, painting everything gold. She wasn't whole, but she was healing. She wasn't alone anymore. Daniel and Jenna were walking the same road, and Judith was steady at her side. The foundation had cracked, yes, but she was already laying bricks for something stronger, something real. That evening, Alyssa sat at her desk, sketching a new logo for a client. When her phone buzzed, it was a text from Daniel. They listed the house this morning. Asking price is a joke. The bank will eat them alive. Alyssa stared at the screen, then typed back, "They built a castle on sand. Let the tide take it," Daniel replied, truth. And for the first time in months, Alyssa smiled, not bitterly, but peacefully. There was power in truth. Power in choosing how your story continues, no matter where it began. 6 months had passed since that dinner, and Alyssa Carter no longer recognized the woman who had walked out of her parents' house with trembling hands and a heart cracked wide open that night. She had felt abandoned, betrayed, and hollow. But now, as she stood in the center of her new studio, surrounded by large windows, natural light, and the quiet hum of possibility, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Stability. The space wasn't flashy, but it was hers. A mix of modern furniture and warm textures, artwork from local creators pinned to the walls, a whiteboard full of client deadlines, a desk scattered with color swatches and storyboards. Morgan Carter, design had gone from survival mode to steady growth. 3 new clients had signed in the past month. A national stationery brand had just approved a complete visual rebrand proposal, and the freelance assistant she hired 3 months ago was about to become her first full-time employee. More than the revenue, it was the rhythm that had changed. Longer reactive, she now created with intention on her own terms, fueled not by fear of eviction, but by purpose and clarity. Daniel stopped by every Tuesday afternoon, bringing takeout and sarcastic commentary about consultant life. He had left finance behind entirely now, helping small businesses find sustainable growth models. And while his new path wasn't as lucrative as his old job, his face had softened, his voice, no longer tight with performance anxiety. He joked more, laughed louder, wore jeans instead of suits, and confessed over noodles. One evening that he finally felt like himself for the first time since college. Jenna had bloomed in her own way, too focused and fierce. In her final semesters, she had reclaimed her academic trajectory with a vengeance. She was dating someone now, someone kind, who wore tattoos like armor and listened more than he spoke. Someone who brought her bubble tea during late-night study sessions and told her that brilliance didn't require parental permission. They were happy in a quiet, grounded way that made Alyssa hopeful and maybe a little wistful. Their sibling bond had become something sacred, forged in shared wounds and mutual protection. They met weekly without fail, dinners in each other's small apartments, group chats full of memes and venting sessions and stories of healing. Their parents were not invited. They had lost the house as expected. The listing had sat untouched for weeks until the bank forced a short sale. The new cars had been repossessed, the timeshare surrendered. Marilyn took a job at a department store, folding sweaters between women who didn't recognize her last name. Bruce worked part-time for an insurance firm, reviewing claims he once would have dismissed as beneath him. They lived in a small apartment now 2 towns over, sparse furniture, tight budget. Judith helped only where necessary, 3 months' rent paid in cash, a grocery gift card around the holidays, and not $1 more. They had to face the consequences and rebuild on their own. That was the line Judith had drawn, and Alyssa had honored it. 3 months after the collapse, Alyssa received a message on her business line. A polite inquiry about design services from someone named Bruce Carter. Note, no explanation, just an email signature and a link to a community nonprofit. Alyssa stared at it for a long time before closing the tab, unread. Not yet, not now, maybe not ever. Her boundaries were firm, not out of cruelty but protection. She had learned that forgiveness was not the same as access, and love, without trust, was a house without foundation. She had learned to choose peace over guilt and self-respect over blood ties. 1 year to the day after the infamous dinner, Judith invited Alyssa, Daniel, and Jenna to brunch. Not the usual tea and cookies, but something more formal. A legacy conversation, she called it. They gathered in her sunroom, the one with sunlight that danced on hardwood floors, and framed family photos that now felt both painful and precious. Judith spoke clearly. Without emotion, but not without warmth, I want to talk about what comes next. Not just with money, but with meaning. We've all seen what secrecy breeds. I want that cycle to end here. They talked for hours about finances and ethics, about responsibility and transparency, about what it meant to carry the family name forward, not just as beneficiaries, but as builders. They drafted what Judith called a living family charter, outlining how future trust distributions would be managed collaboratively, how decisions would be made with shared input, how honesty would be the first rule, not the last resort. It was less legal contract, more emotional blueprint, a framework for something cleaner, stronger, truer than what came before. They toasted with orange juice instead of champagne, and laughed about Daniel's inability to poach eggs and Jenna's ongoing feud with her economics professor. And Alyssa looked around that table and felt full, not from the food, but from the restoration of something she thought she'd lost. A family not perfect but chosen, not inherited but forged. That night back in her apartment, Alyssa opened her email and saw a message from her mother's subject line, "Thinking of you today. Good luck on your pitch." The body contained just 2 lines. "I hope today goes well. I know how hard you've worked, love. Mom?" It was simple, small, without pleading or guilt, without demands or manipulation, and that restraint, that respect, was the first true gesture of growth. She had seen in a long time, Alyssa replied. "Thank you. I'll let you know how it goes." It wasn't warm, it wasn't a door swung open, but it was honest, and that was enough. The next morning her pitch landed. She secured a contract that would double her income for the quarter, and as her team cheered over celebratory donuts, She excused herself, stepped outside into the morning light, and called, "Grandma Judith." "Just landed the Mitchell deal." Judith's voice lit up through the phone. "Alyssa, I'm proud of you, not just for the work, but for the woman you've become." Alyssa smiled into the quiet "thanks, Grandma" I learned from the best later that night as she stood at her window watching city lights blink like a pulse. She realized something the woman who had sat stunned at that dinner table a year ago no longer existed. She had been broken by betrayal, yes, but in that fracture she had found her fire. She had rebuilt, not just a business, but a life. She trusted herself. Now, her judgment, her instincts, her worth. She no longer needed anyone's approval. She required only their respect. And she had learned that family wasn't defined by blood or performance or carefully crafted illusions. It was defined by truth, by action, by the people who showed up when it counted and stayed when things got hard. She had found that in her siblings, in her grandmother, and in herself, the betrayal had nearly destroyed her. But it had also delivered her. And for that, strangely quietly, she was grateful.